Well, I think we can get started, and I will let, you know, I'll admit folks as they keep coming in. Excellent. So hello, welcome everyone. This is Nagashri from Women in Clean Tech. I'm a board member at Women in Clean Tech and chair of the Entrepreneurship Committee. And I'm based out of Fremont. I'm excited to welcome Karen to this, episode of Fireside Chat with you ladies as part of the Founder Series. For those of you that are new to WCS, Women in Clean Tech, and this series, I'd like to tell you a little bit about us. So Women in Clean Tech is a nonprofit that's focused on helping bring about parity in women in clean tech and sustainability. We organize events that helps connect women within these, industries, as well as we bring thought leadership up, as well as create local chapters. So we have more than 20,000 members across 15 years, 15 countries. And we have a chapter here in San Francisco, one in New York, a European chapter, and we're opening up new chapters in Portland, Denver, and New England. And a little bit about the Founder Series. So typically the Entrepreneurship Committee is focused on the same pillars at Women in Clean Tech. We want to bring about parity within the entrepreneurship landscape for women. And then my goal is to create unique opportunities for you all to meet each other and exchange ideas. So I think the Founder Series has been incredibly successful in doing that. And so yeah, and I have a couple of other events that are upcoming that I would like to highlight. Next week, we have a Showing Proof of Traction by Ivan Markman. He is a close contact of mine from the venture world, and he will demonstrate some really excellent strategies on how, when you're pitching or, putting forth your ideas to investors, how can you, put that well. And then, as you all know, we have the pitch competition coming up as part of the San Francisco Climate Week. We've got a huge round of applications from 40 plus women, and we're excited to bring 10 women to pitch at MBC Biolabs in San Francisco on April 20th. I will be, if you haven't received an invite yet, I will send over an invitation, and feel free to find us on our website. With that, I'll give a quick intro about myself. I'm Nagashri. I have 15 plus years of experience within the clean tech. I used to be an architect, did green buildings, ground up, large scale, and knew everything about energy efficiency behind the meter. Then I pivoted to renewable energy and storage. I was with Tesla for about 6 years doing business operations, scaling up their Powerwall and Solar Roof B2B business. And then I took a break to start my own venture, Gaia Force, and joined Women in Clean Tech as a volunteer, as well as, in 6 months into it, I was offered the board position. So super excited to be part of this organization. And so that's about me. I would like to pass the baton over to Karen. And before we start the chat is for her to give a quick intro about herself, and I'm excited. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much. Happy Friday, everyone. It's so good to be here among fellow women working in clean energy and fighting the hard fight. I am excited for this session. I'm also really excited to make it a conversation. So please don't hesitate to chime in with questions, with comments. Just type things in the chat because we're all here together and not here to tell you how things are supposed to be done, but just here to tell you one story. And we'd love to hear from you as well on kind of your story. So I'm Karen. I grew up in Belgium. I grew up as a sailor on the Belgian North Sea. And sailing is what made me really, really passionate about preserving our planet, our ocean and planet, and which made me decide that I wanted to focus my career on decarbonizing industry and preserving our planet. That brought me on a wild, certainly not linear journey from chemical engineering in Belgium to a renewable energy engineering degree in Germany. Germany is where I started my first startup as the first employee after the founders. So only woman in that startup with a lot of Eastern German men, which was certainly an interesting experience. After that, I became a strategy consultant at Bain and Company, where I spent a few years working on decarbonization strategies for some big chemical companies, energy companies. Really interesting work, great exposure. And also left me a bit frustrated after a few years and making a lot of beautiful slides. Most of the time, the answer was, well, decarbonization is too expensive, so we're not going to do anything yet. That's when I realized that I wanted to stay in the same space, decarbonizing heavy industry, but I wanted to really focus on technology innovation because ultimately that is the thing that on the long term can help us make clean solutions at cost parity or bring them to cost parity with incumbent solutions. And so decided to do that through an MBA in the Bay Area. So I moved from Belgium at the time to California to start a 2-year MBA at Stanford. Had a sprint as investor at Breakthrough Energy Ventures throughout that time. And right after the MBA started Ammobia, the company that I've now had the privilege of being a co-founder and CEO of for the last three and a half years. And that's been, I'm sure we'll talk much more about that, but that's been a really rewarding roller coaster, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. That's quite a journey from being a sailor all the way to traveling across the ocean and then being here in the United States and starting your own company. That's quite incredible. What this community would love to know, Karen, is like, what was that ideation like in the beginning while you were at Breakthrough, where you came across this idea of Ammobia? Like, what was that spark that helped you kind of initiate that thought process? I know you have a chemical engineering background, but what was that moment that made you realize Ammobia?
Yeah, great question. And first of all, I want to say I think it's Steve Jobs, right, who says you can only connect the dots going backwards. I feel like, as founders, when we tell our story to investors, it always seems like we've always known you. For the last 10 years, we've been on this linear path, and it makes so much sense that now we're starting this company. I think, at least for me, looking at my journey, I've always been focused on I knew broadly what I wanted to do, right? Decarbonizing heavy industry, but there's so many things you can do within that. What I've been for the last 10 years focused on is just how do I continue to keep learning? How do I continue to find ways to be, like 10% out of my comfort zone? Like a little bit so that you keep pushing yourself, but not too much because then it becomes like really I don't want to say dangerous, but you feel like you're not in a good spot. So that, and then just always doing a lot of different things, right? Cross-functional, going from doing something more technical to doing something much more business oriented in different places in the world. I feel like that has helped me to kind of, learn about the same space from different angles. And I think that certainly now as a founder helps me in my job. Now your question on how did the idea come together? When I started at Stanford, the MBA, in some way, after having worked for a while in very intense jobs, suddenly I felt like I had so much time. And there was so much I could do, and I had this freedom, and I could really decide what I wanted to spend most of the hours of my day on. And so I decided that I wanted to go pick a lane. So I knew I wanted to decarbonize in heavy industry, but I figured that if I stayed too broad, I would never come up with a unique insight or the right thing to do. And so I decided early in 2020 that I would pick the lane being clean fuels, hydrogen and derivatives. And I did everything I could do to just go really deep in that space and become the absolute hydrogen nerd. and also become the person that, when anyone would mention hydrogen, people would be like, oh, talk to her. She can't stop talking about it. um, and I think doing that helped and led to a lot of opportunities. So to be a bit more specific there, I just started reading anything I could find about hydrogen. I started a hydrogen student club at the university, which was a great way to bring people from the different schools together. So people from the policy school and PhDs and MBAs. And we would just have like very nerdy sessions talking about hydrogen, but we would also just go for beers together to get to know each other. I helped Stanford set up their hydrogen initiative, which was an initiative that also brought industry leaders together. And so there were a lot of the big like oil and gas companies, big stakeholders from large corporation that were involved there. And me being involved in initially, I was literally just helping with scheduling the conference, but that just gave me kind of, first interactions with a lot of these leaders and helped me to start building the network in hydrogen. Then I started a hydrogen student club. I started a hydrogen podcast through the Stanford network. And that was another thing where it was just like, I talked to a stakeholder at Stanford. It's like, how about we start a podcast about hydrogen? And they're like, yeah, sure, let's do it. You can do whatever you want. You can use the Stanford brand. Just make sure it's focused on hydrogen, which was another amazing excuse to just go talk to smart people and hydrogen and start building kind of like a brand and a network in hydrogen. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And throughout all of that, I was just learning so much about hydrogen, about the opportunities and about the challenges. When I spent some time at Breakthrough Energy Ventures, I got to work on their hydrogen thesis, which was also an amazing opportunity to learn from seasoned investors in the hydrogen space and evaluate a lot of different hydrogen companies. So I learned a lot there on kind of what makes a great company, what are all the challenges, how can we overcome these challenges, and seeing that for like not 5, but like 10 different startups was an amazing opportunity, kind of like take all these learnings, and also honestly made me extremely excited to go try it out myself at some point. So after all of that work in hydrogen, the podcast, building the network, I started kind of like on a bi-weekly basis summarizing the learnings from the industry to really think about, okay, what are really the big opportunities and what are the big challenges? And that is what led me to ammonia. Ammonia is one of the largest derivatives from hydrogen. So it's very much in the same space. And it's this molecule that like very little people talk about, but that has a huge current market, huge climate opportunity, huge opportunity because it's a fertilizer. Half of the world's food is dependent on ammonia, but it's also becoming an energy carrier. And so I just started being really excited about this molecule and the opportunities in that molecule. And also saw that the way in which ammonia was produced was invented 100 years ago. It was a genius invention, Haber and Bosch. Some of you might recognize the name. They won the Nobel Prize for it, but it hadn't changed for the last 100 years. And when I started looking at ammonia, there was one startup globally doing anything on ammonia production innovation. So at that point, I felt like, okay, this is a huge opportunity, huge market. Nobody talks about it for some reason. And there's only one startup doing anything on innovating in that space. So that's when I decided this is what I want to do. Finding a way to produce ammonia at lower cost and in a cleaner way. And so it was very much like not a technology push, right? It was more like a market pull. Of course, I am not technically smart enough to come up with an idea on how to make ammonia better than these two guys who won the Nobel Prize 100 years ago. So the approach I took was let me just go talk to as many people as possible and learn from the experts in the space. Let's learn from the people that have been thinking about this process for years, if not decades, and see whether they have ideas. I was lucky to still have my Stanford email at the time. So I just used that email and I reached out to all the labs and universities and experts I could find in the world that were doing anything on ammonia production innovation. And very much used to like, hey, I'm a student. I'm just eager to learn about this. And that was such a great way to talk to a lot of people globally and really learn and kind of like, what have they tried? What has worked? What hasn't worked? And I tried to evaluate all of these things based on 2 criteria. Very simple. The first one was, is this an innovation that we can bring to the market within the next like 5 to 10 years? because I'm very impatient. And I feel like in the climate crisis, this might resonate to many of you. We don't have time to lose. Like we need to find solutions now. And then the second criteria that I used was, can this innovation actually become cheaper than the current solution? Because I genuinely believe that, yes, in the beginning there can be policy incentives, but ultimately you need something that can be equally competitive. Otherwise, it's not going to really reach widespread adoption. And so with these two criteria, there was only one technology innovation that really checked those boxes. And there was actually paper written about it in Cambridge, so in one university in the UK, and in Minnesota, so one university in the US, but nobody had tried it experimentally. Once I started going deeper on that specific technology, I tested it with some people in the industry who I kind of respected as like, these are the people that have looked at this process for more than 30 years. Like, if they think this is a good idea, I know like there is something here. And I got a lot of positive reactions about it. A lot of people were like, this is really interesting. I can't believe nobody has tried this before. It has a lot of potential. And so that's when I felt like, okay, we're onto something here. We need to do something with this. And that's where I brought in my now co-founder, Tristan, who was doing his PhD at the time at Stanford, who I had met through the Stanford Hydrogen Club and kind of all the efforts on campus. And he was one of the people that I would kind of regularly test my ideas with. And we'll talk about that later a little bit. But I think a lot about like, how should I work with people that are complementary to me, you know, who have the strengths that where I maybe have my weaknesses. And so Tristan was one of these people who's like technically extremely strong, spent a lot of time in the lab. And he was actually the most critical one of all the PhDs that I talked to. And every time I came with an idea, it's like, never gonna work. Never gonna work. And so that day when I brought him this technology, he was quiet for a while and he said, that's really interesting. And that's, I think, when we felt like, okay, there's something here. We're onto something. We locked ourselves into a room to make a big techno-economic analysis together. That looked good. And that's when we slowly started having the co-founder conversations, started doing our first experiments in a lab in the basement, and then raised our first $4 million funding round. So that was our pre-seed in 2023. So that's a long-winded answer, but that gives a little bit of color on kind of like how Ammobia came together.
Yeah, amazing. Oh my God, I love your passion, Karen, about the topic. If I ever want to know more about hydrogen and ammonia, I know who to go to. Um, this is like the inception about ammonia. I'd like to know a little bit more about building Ammobia. So I know you've been at Bain, you were at Stanford, you've been at Breakthrough, and go and researching on your own in that journey. Like, what has helped you build Ammobia? Like from that story where we ended, you guys started in a room and you did an analysis to today, like building it. What has helped you and helped you shape it?
Great question. Yeah. I often think about, as a founder, you need to be, I don't want to say naive, but you need to be a little bit optimistic, you know? It's actually better that when you start, you don't know all the challenges that are going to be ahead of you, because otherwise you would probably never start. And I think about that a lot in the sense that, after we did that first experiment in the lab and it looked good and we're like, we have to do this. We said, okay, we need to start our first funding round. And at that point, it was like, okay, we're going to try to raise $4 million. That seems like such a hard endeavor. I had something in mind. It was like, okay, once we reach that, then like everything will be so much easier. And then like when you reach that milestone, you're there and then you see the next challenge ahead of you. Like, okay, now we need to start building a team. We need to like actually go do this. Like every time the challenges actually come bigger. But taking it step by step, and just always focusing on that next milestone and having some kind of like belief that you will figure it out. I think is a lot of kind of what the founder journey is like. So to be more specific, I feel what I really love about being a founder and CEO is that you do so many different things every day. And there's so many challenges on your path. across like people, right? A lot of it is people, finding the right people, hiring the right first team members is so crucial to your success, but also bringing people together from very different industries, like working together with the very technical scientists in the lab every day, but then also making that bridge and connection with the financial investors, the Silicon Valley type VC, who are then very different to the large corporates that we need to do deals with, the like large strategic investors who've been at Chevron or Shell for 30 years. And so much of it is actually that people aspect, bringing people together, bringing people on the journey, sharing kind of the vision with different team members, and kind of having this, I would say, combination of passion and persistence, but also humility. I feel like so much of my journey at Ammobia has been how do I surround myself by people who intimidate me and who are complementary to me. One of the mistakes I made early on is that before Ammobia, I actually tried to start a few businesses and I made a lot of mistakes and they didn't work out. And one of my main learnings was I was trying to start companies with people that were way too much like me. And in the beginning, it feels great. It was like, oh, we work so well together. Yeah, why do we work together so well? Because we have the same ideas, we have the same background. But it came with challenges because one, we just, when you're too similar, especially in a hard tech business where you really need to look at the problem from different perspectives. I don't think that makes for a successful team. And the second thing was when you're too similar, you want to do the same things in the company. And so that inherently kind of creates some friction, I would say. And I think a lot about, starting a company is hard enough. Everything you can do to make it easier, do it. And so for me, when I think about my relationship with my co-founder, I feel really good about the fact that we are extremely complementary. His strengths are where my weaknesses are, and the other way around. And it's super clear on kind of who does what in the business. And we know enough about each other's piece to be dangerous to each other and to challenge each other. And that makes for a really good partnership. And then the other thing is, I guess, like to my earlier point, like learning on the go. I think maybe this might resonate with some of you in the room, but I feel like often you're like, oh, I don't have all the skill sets. I don't think I can do it now. If I do this other thing or this other job, then I will have enough background and expertise to do this. But I feel like a lot of it is also just taking the leap, right? Going for it, and having the confidence that you're gonna figure it out along the way, but also the humility that you might need a lot of advice and help from people around you, and then that's fine. So these are some of my unstructured reflections.
Thank you so much, Karen. I recently heard a podcast about Diary of CEO with Gad Sad, and he said the same thing you said is that birds of a feather that flock together don't make for complementary, like good partners. What really makes the good partners is having that void which you have and somebody filling that void. And so I love hearing that was your, thing for success. Isabel, I saw you had a hand raised. Did you have a specific question to Karen about like her initial journey? And then I'll have time in the end, but I don't want it to become a big segue. But you can ask the question now.
I can tell you what I was going to ask, and we can do it later either way. When you mentioned the pre-seed fundraising and 4 million, which is pretty amazing and pretty good amount for a pre-seed, that was what my question was about. I work with a lot of heavy infrastructure. We have marine energy. Actually, we had an ammonia startup also in our last cohort, and so again, Nagashri, I can ask later, but I was kind of trying to understand about the fundraising, including potential grants, but it sounded like it's mostly dilutive. And how Karen pulled that off, because I can tell you pre-revenue capital in climate tech is like you have to be superwoman. And so my question was more about that than and I see nice nodding yes, like wow.
How did you do it? How did you do it? How did you pull it off?
It's a really good question, Isabel. There's unfortunately no right answer. I mean, it is incredibly hard. When I think back about that first round I think we talked to like 110 investors and 100 said no and 10 ended up investing. fundraising is such a big distraction to building, right? Especially when you look at these numbers. I mean, it's like at least 6 months, more typically in like hard tech, 9 to 12 months of like spending 80% of your time fundraising. And so I guess I did feel like, okay, if we're going to do this, it needs to be a significant amount, because if we're going to do this and then start raising right after, then like there's no time to actually go build something. So that was one consideration. I also think there's a consideration of that round was 2 years, a bit more than 2 years ago. I mean, things are changing, unfortunately. That's something to take into account. We since then, so last year we raised an $8 million round. And to my earlier point, I was like, this is going to be easier because now we have so much more to show, and it was not easier. If anything, it was harder. A few things that we've done is one, work much more with strategic investors. Because especially in heavy industry, these are players that can be customers, that can be partners, that are extremely relevant to the business and can bring much more than just capital. And so that for our business at least is really valuable. Second thing is, given the current kind of macro dynamics on clean energy in the US, what it took for us was really looking outside of the box and outside of the US borders. And so we doubled down a lot on Europe and Asia, specifically Japan and Korea. We spent a lot of time there. We built a lot of relationships there. And 80% of our last round was actually investors from these geographies. And so I think without that, it would just not have been possible. And then the last thing is non-dilutive funding is, of course, something that we are now heavily focused on. We're looking a lot at grants all over the world, but also specifically in Europe. And especially for hard to abate sectors where you need a lot of dollars, I think that's also really important to make things work.
Thank you so much, Karen. Yeah,
that was perfect. Because my other question was about US versus outside, and I work with a company called Metico out of Caltech, which you may know, but they've also raised a lot outside for the same reasons, very similar. So thank you for sharing your experience.
Yeah. Awesome, Karen. That gives us like the right question for you next is, how did you build your credibility in front of all of these investors? What was it that you really worked on to convince these folks here in US, first for the 4 million and now 8 million, that you have convinced international investors? What did you guys do to build your credibility?
Great question. And it's something that I continue to, I learn every day and continue to build every day. A few things that stand out to me. One is ultimately so much of this is like, yes, in the background, they're building their like financial model and like investment thesis, but especially at pre-seed, but also seed and even Series A, so much of it is like people investing in people and building trust with people and getting their genuine excitement. And when I think about that last round, we talked to 110 investors. The investors that ended up investing were all, without any exception, investors where I essentially like jumped on a plane and kind of showed up organically as a coincidence in the city where they were to actually sit down with them in person and build that in-person relationship. So I feel like when you're kind of in a certain point in the process, doing that, going out of your way to make that happen and build that personal relationship can actually go a long way. Another thing is a lot of these relationships take time. Now, as an example, we had 2 Japanese investors join in our last round, but we started kind of building relationships with them 2 years ago. And I think that's a great example of like 2 years ago, I felt like, oh, that's distraction. I need to be focused on the immediate things. But like starting these things early and building these relationships leads to a lot of good things further down the line. Another big one is I feel like as founders, you're often so focused on like pitching, and convincing people about your ideas, but actually listening first can be extremely powerful. And kind of to be specific there, what I've tried to do more and more over the years is even in like pitch sessions, having them talk first and first listening about what they care about in this space, listening about what they're passionate about in this space, and being genuinely interested in the other person, but also then being able to tailor how we tell our story to what things they care about. And I feel like that can often be really powerful and really helpful in the kind of like fundraising journey. Another big one is I feel like it's okay to not have all the answers. And that's something I don't think I did a good job of at in the very beginning, right? You feel like when an investor asks you a question, you have to have answers to all of them. But it's actually, I think, sometimes more powerful to say, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question right now, than coming up with an answer that is like, not really an answer. Another thing is like the more I learn about investors and kind of hearing my friends who are in VC speak is like their job is trying to find reasons to say no, right? They have all these companies that reach out, they can only invest in whatever it is, 1%, 5%. And so when they listen to you, they're just trying to find something to say, no, this is not going to work. And actually presenting these challenges up front. So bringing up that challenge that they're probably thinking about proactively, and then telling them how you think about that and how you think about mitigating these challenges, I think can sometimes be more effective than just trying to hide them. And then there's another one, which might be a bit of a cultural one, but I feel like sometimes a challenge, especially in the like Silicon Valley VC world, is that investors are used to this, like, hyping things up and having a crazy vision. And like, if you have a plan, like double it or actually like multiply it by 10 because they're going to divide it by 2 anyway. I actually feel like, and this might be a bit of a cultural thing because I think Europeans in general, it can be more direct. Actually being pretty candid and honest about what you think is a realistic plan is something that I care about a lot, because I can't go stand in front of an investor and like come up with a plan that I can't stand behind. And I know that for some investors, that some investors maybe that does not resonate and that's not the type of founder they want to invest in. But I like to believe that other investors, that is the type of founder they want to invest in. And then you immediately create this sense of trust, which can go a long way and also can make you stand out. And yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, Isabel, the kind of like this balance of like ambition, but also being realistic and being humble, I guess.
Yeah. Amazing, Karen. I have two follow-up questions on that. You mentioned you jumped on a plane to go meet these people. You started building relationship with the Japanese investors like for 2 years. Can you give us a quick like overview of how from there till now, like how did you navigate keeping them abreast about the progress, re-engagement? Like a lot of us get overwhelmed by, are we like bothering people too much? How much information? How often should we be giving this information? If you can give a little bit insight on that. And then the second question regarding what you explained was, and I'll repeat it again after you've finished the first part, is if you can give us some examples for Ammobia specifically. What are some of the questions you brought, which investors were going to say no to? What were some of those questions that you said, we've thought about this already? So first, how did you build the relationships? And then how did you impress them?
Yeah, great question. So on the first, how to build relations, I mean, indeed, it's hard, right? Because you have a small team, you only have that many hours a day, and you can't go build relationships with everyone in the world. So I guess there is something about focus. I think when we started raising our last round, and we saw that, so for context, we started raising in January last year. We had just won a $4 million grant from the DOE. And so I sent out an email to my list of investors saying, we just won this amazing grant. We're raising a round, but you'll have to be quick because, we're getting so much traction. Literally 3 days after I sent that email, the DOE grant disappeared given the administration change.
Yeah.
And when you clicked on the link, it just said 404 page not found.
Yes.
And so I'd sent this email to all these investors, and there was no grant. And the complete macro environment was kind of going against clean energy. And I think at that point I was like, this is going to be very hard. I think what we did was taking a step back and saying, okay, what are the countries in the world, the regions in the world where there's still a lot of traction around clean energy and ammonia? And then really spending a lot of time specifically in these regions, right? So not like all the countries in the world, like it was specifically like Europe, Japan, Korea. For each of these geographies, trying to figure out, do we have existing investors or advisors in our network that know people there, and have them introduce us? Because I feel like, especially in certain cultures, but like across the board, having like a trusted party introduce you can also go a long way, right? So it's not that we just took a plane and like we showed up and we're like, hello. Like all of these events, it was like, okay, we had like existing investors who made a bunch of introductions to us, who sometimes even came with us to like literally like go present us to their trusted partners in these regions. So that helped a lot. Tactically, on like how do you then like keep these relationships going? We have like a quarterly newsletter for our broader group of investors, and I think that helps. But I think the bigger one, which takes a lot of time, is the more like one-on-one interactions. I think for
Yeah.
me, a success metric I use is like, am I on WhatsApp or iMessage basis with that person? Because then you create this like, oh, there's real trust here, you know? And like I always try to think about like how can they contribute to the business, and ask them specific questions in the areas where they have expertise. I actually think it goes a long way because they feel like they are helpful to you. They feel like they're on the journey with you. And so these kind of small things can really help to strengthen the relationship. And just making sure that there's regular touch points so that like the day that you actually go ask for money, hopefully you have built that relationship. You have had so many touch points that it's not kind of like coming out of the blue or anything.
Excellent. Thank you so much for showing us that insight. And then if you can share a couple of, uh, research items that you mentioned for Ammobia while you were pitching to investors that you already posed, brought about the questions that they were going to say no to. Do you have some of those like examples to share with this audience?
Yes, and I mean, this might be very specific to my industry, so I don't know how helpful it is broadly, but that's just to show you some specific examples. When people think about the challenges related to ammonia, and I'm sure that might resonate with Mona and maybe Isabel as well, the first thing they say is, oh, ammonia is toxic and dangerous. And the second thing they say is, yeah, clean ammonia is based on green hydrogen, and green hydrogen is too expensive, and that market is crashing. And so actually starting the presentation by saying, look, there are safety concerns with ammonia, but there's all these reasons why that can be mitigated. And yes, green hydrogen is still too expensive today, but one, the cost is significantly going down. And two, we can work with other feedstocks as well. You kind of immediately go in like mitigating the challenges that this investor might have in their head. And if you don't address them from the beginning, the whole presentation, they might just be, thinking about that one thing and almost not even listening to your story. So that's kind of a
Yeah.
specific example of how we try to deal with that.
Excellent. Yeah, those are some great insights. And Karen, so I realize, not many people know about ammonia, how it's manufactured, and where it's used, what's the market share and such. I know there are investors probably that you reached out who are specific to that. But in general, like when you are in deep tech and you're trying to, talk to a, wide range of audience, and I don't know if your current investor and your past investors are people who only invest in deep tech, but question for a larger audience and those that are very, technical and are bringing products to the market is like, how do you translate all these complex ideas into a simplified version? And like, if you can give an example, and I think you did really well at the pitch competition. So, but if you can tell this audience, how did you bring that complex idea of simplifying, cost-effective ammonia manufacturing?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's certainly a challenge, and many of you might face that, right? When you're in like a very specific, what I like to say, unsexy business. Most people don't wake up and think about ammonia, right? How do you actually catch their attention? To your point, like simplify, simplify, simplify. I used to think that, like very technical people that can explain something where I'm like, I'm not following you, or like the smartest people in the room. actually more and more, I feel like people that can actually talk about a very complex topic in a very simple way, in a way that everyone understands, that's actually kind of like a superpower. And so what I've tried to do is like keeping the pitches extremely like simple and easy to understand, really focusing on what is the broader challenge and how do we mitigate that challenge. And like I try to actually like test that pitch with like family members or like people who are like as far as possible from our industry, thinking that if they don't understand it, I'm doing something wrong. And so yeah, making it as simple as possible. And the second thing is I feel like often you have like pitch competitions where, you know, investors sit down and they listen to 100 pitches after each other. And it's always the same thing, right? Like there's a huge challenge, but we are amazing and we're going to solve this, which at some point they might just like check out and start looking at their, I don't know, Instagram, doing something slightly different. Whether it is, you know, starting your pitch in a very different way to what other people do, or like using a bit of humor, like doing something that actually catches their attention and makes them actually put their phone away and like, I'm gonna actually listen to this. So also that I try to like experiment with on kind of how do we actually, you know, go a little bit outside of the typical path for to make sure that they're actually paying attention. And then the last one on like pitches specifically is that more and more I hear specifically from pitch coaches that now with AI, a lot of the pitches are like perfect and they're too perfect. Right? Like every word is like very you just hear that it's not like your language. You hear that like you had a script written by AI and then you memorized it. And so taking that out of the picture and just trying to use your own language, because it's ultimately it's you speaking, and if it's not going to be your words, and like they're going to be mistakes. Like I make mistakes all the time. Like that's actually like powerful, right? Because it's genuine, it's you, and it's you speaking, and that matters. And I think with everything going on in the AI, that's actually going to matter more and more every day.
Yeah, excellent. Awesome. There's a question from Banu is like, how did you assess when was the right time to raise, especially for pre-seed? That's a great question.
Hi, Karen. Hey, Banu.
Good to see you.
Great to see you. It's such a hard question. There's never a right time. When we got started, we tried to think about, okay, now we don't have anything. We have an idea. We know that in hard tech, to raise multiple millions, they want to see something. There needs to be something physical, and there needs to be some initial commercial traction. And depending on the industry you're in, that can mean a lot of different things. But what we did specifically was like, can we like figure out some grants or some support that gets us to that first physical test that is an early proof point on like, we've tried this, there's actually ammonia produced and it seems like it's going in the right direction. And then thinking about what's that first initial commercial traction thing you can do, so that you can really go out with the bang and you say, we have proof points on the technical and the commercial side. And then every time that we raise again, we try to think about like, what's that big next thing that they need to see to like kick off the next funding round. What we started doing now as well is like right after we raise, that's actually a good time to go talk to investors. And I can tell you then I'm like, the last thing I wanted to know is go talk to investors. But I think talking to investors then is actually really powerful because you're not asking them anything. So it's a great way to build relationships, but you're not asking them money, I mean, but then asking them actually, okay, what would you need to see next year to invest in this? And then building your plan based on what the feedback you get from them can also be a really powerful way to go try to figure out like, okay, what is it actually that we need to go do before we can go for a next big funding round? And there is a timing component as well, which I'm sure many of you have experienced that like they say that there's only 2 windows where VCs are actually active during the year. So like don't do it in the summer and don't do it in like Thanksgiving, Christmas. Like it's super slow there. It's really important that you can like start with a bang. So I feel like the best like windows are really either like the start of the year or like I guess right after the summer, like September, end of August, September.
Excellent, thank you. I think we've less time left. I want to leave some room for Q&A. Leslie, I know you've typed questions. But if you want to unmute yourself and ask the questions, greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, that would be great. So I have a few questions. Any tips for the product market fit stage in terms of outreach? I'm getting a lot of, as you said, interesting, and it's driving me crazy. And then how do you get warm investor introductions? That's like the whole, as if you have that own network of your own. Haha. And what kinds of investors did you start with, move to? Was it a mix like angels, VCs, grants? So those are my three questions.
Wow, these are really good questions. On the first one, the product market fit, I mean, it's really hard. To your point, sometimes it's hard to know whether they're actually like what you're proposing. Something that we started using internally in the commercial team is there's literally a criteria which is called, is this customer desperate or thirsty enough for our solution? And so there's different ways of assessing that, but really taking a step back and thinking about like, do we really feel like they're like pulling it out of our hand? Like they really need it. It makes a difference for them and their organization. And it's not priority 10, but it's in the like top 5 priorities on what they care about. And like, I guess being honest to yourself on that as early as you can, I feel like is a metric that has helped us a lot. The second one on warm intros, using fellow founders, I've found be really helpful. Like when I look at an investor, when I get an intro to, the first thing I check is there anyone in their portfolio that I know, right? Because that's the strongest intro. The second one is any of my existing investors friends with them. That's the second strongest. And really trying to focus on those. And then like broader network of like advisors, friends, kind of going down the list like that. And of course, getting out there yourself as well, right? Like going to the events yourself. It's sometimes like tiring and it's a lot, but that's also where you meet a lot of them organically.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think we have a question from Monica about like how she can support. So, which is like a two-part question, right? I would like to take Monica's question and spin it around. How did you hire your first hires? And that will kind of answer Monica's question is like, what did you look for in the first few employees that you hired?
Yeah, that is such a great question, though, Monica. Thank you for that question. So one thing that comes to mind for us is like for the first employees, you have a job description, and then as you might have experienced in reality, your job might be very different. And that is not because there was malintention, right? That it's just because in an early stage startup, things change so quickly. And so the number one attribute of a good early employee is someone who has that agility and that willingness to learn and that ability to like help you extinguish fires. And on top of that, being proactive in it. I think some of our best early employees are the ones that like literally come up to us and are like, I see we have a challenge here. I think we should do it differently. And this is how I suggest to do it differently. Let me know if you want me to take that off your plate. Like coming with these solutions and proactively. And sometimes you might feel like, oh, that's actually not in my scope. Am I overstepping? Like, no, there's like every day you have this like 100 things on your list and you never even get to 20. And like someone who actually proactively thinks outside of their own box for the good of the company is extremely powerful and extremely helpful.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation there. I think Monica has a follow-up question. Did you ever get investment from US investors?
Yes, absolutely. So the first round was almost exclusively US-based investors, and then a good amount of them also followed on in the second round. So we still have, I guess, almost half of our funding probably overall is US investors. I mean, it is still the case that a lot of there's more like VC and like real high risk capital here than anywhere else in the world. And so, of course, leveraging that and continuing to leverage that is really important. I actually also initially thought, oh no, maybe going to Europe and Asia now is gonna like scare them off or it's gonna limit our opportunities in the US. It's absolutely not the case. Like investors want us to see us be creative and think outside of the box to go where the pockets of opportunities are. And they actually, I think they even like it.
Yeah, and I think you've said it well. Going global shows more, confirmation in the market. So I love that you guys have reached out. Thanks for that. No, I think you've got your hand raised if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really resonated with your experience, like taking a lot of both technical and then commercial roles and kind of gradually building that conviction into something you want to build. So for a lot of us, I think women tend to kind of like over build up criteria in our experiences to feel ready. So what is the balance of what triggers that you think is enough, that there's enough conviction, I should just have a leap of faith? Thank you.
It's such a good question because you can probably always come up with reasons why it's not enough, right? Like, may I challenge you and say you have enough today? Right? The fact that you're here, the fact that you're thinking about it. I sometimes think about maybe today I wouldn't even have the like risk appetite that I had 4 years ago when I started. Like, there's also a component on like earlier in your life, maybe you have more flexibility, you have like there's phases in your life where you can do more of that and there's phases where you can do less of it, and if it's on top of your mind, that probably means that like you're really excited about it. And I really believe that like learning on the go and just making sure that you always bring in the right people and get the right perspectives from the right people, yeah, like you can figure it out step by step.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. I think on that, I have a question, Karen, for you is like, what are some of the, strengths that you have built along your way as a CEO that has strengthened your capabilities? I know you're very, excited about technicalities, but like, what are some of the things, like, were you always such an extrovert person, or you had to build all of that part of you? I know some of us who are, nerdy, we like to be into the weeds about building something, and then we don't quite build all the people skills and stuff. So what are some of the 2 or 3 strengths that you had to build in your journey as a CEO and a founder?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually learned as a founder that I'm not that much of an extrovert.
Yes.
And I'm sure my partner will agree with that. Now, often in the weekends, I'm like, I don't want to talk to anyone. Like I also need like my me time to recharge. I think when you're like really passionate about something, and you start learning about it more, you become even more passionate about it. And then your connections with people can also be through that channel, right? I feel like that often helps. To me, it's still like going to a networking reception where like I don't have any content to talk about. I still find it a bit scary, to be honest. Or I typically also find it like less energizing. When you're actually in a room with people who are like working on the same things, and you can talk about some of these aspects, I feel like that actually helps a lot. And that makes it more interesting, also makes it more fun. So much of it is fun. Like I heard someone say recently, like when you can never compete with someone who's actually doing their job that is their like hobby, when you're like so excited about something, there's so much and it gives you so much energy. And of course, it's not going to every day be like super fun, but the more you find that joy, the more you're actually going to be good at your job, right? Because you just love what you're doing and you bring so much joy and energy, and that like the whole team feels that. Like the whole team really feels it. And so that's something I think about a lot. And then I think there's something about persistence, but also taking the long view. I think a quote that I saw recently that resonated a lot was like, never get too high when things are going well, but also never get too low when things are going badly. I feel like that's a really important one. Because there's so many highs and lows in the founder journey, and kind of trying to just continue to be focused on that end goal and not be too swayed and impacted by the highs and lows every day. Of course, that's a journey. It doesn't I don't always do it perfectly. I'm still working on that, but I feel like that's something really important. And then the last one I would say is being very like internally driven, like not being too like competitor obsessed, like, or what will people think or whatever it is. I just try to be focused on like, this is what we're trying to achieve as a team. And when I'm like facing a dilemma, like just going back to like, what are we here for? And then often like the answer is pretty obvious if you just keep focusing on kind of that goal you're trying to achieve with the people around you that are on that adventure with you.
Exciting. Thank you so much for explaining all of the nuances of being a a founder and CEO, putting yourself out there, pushing yourself out and meeting more people. I think that's incredible, and continuing to be passionate. We've got 3 minutes left. Karen, I'd love for you to tell all of us what is exciting out there for Ammobia, and what are you looking forward to? And then, how can we all stay true to that excited future of our individual companies?
Totally. First of all, I want to put things in perspective that often when you look at LinkedIn and companies, it all looks like, wow, they're doing amazing and they have win after win. But I think most of you know, but it's important to remind ourselves that often behind that there's so much failure and near failure, and every single successful startup almost dies a few times. And I can give you many specific examples, but one specific example is I told you last year we started raising in January. In August, we're literally almost running out of money. There was a few weeks and I couldn't pay our team anymore. And we had all these strategies that were interested, and we were iterating term sheets, but we were not yet there. And then it was August 1st, and then one of the French players said, well, we're going on holidays. We're coming back in September. And so there's so many moments of that where you're literally this is almost game over, And so just to put things in perspective, that every win, there's been so many challenges and failures and near failures in between. What makes me really excited today is that I like to think that it's actually one of the most exciting times to work in clean energy, because it's a difficult time right now, which means that it's a smaller group of people, but a smaller group of extremely committed people. And I feel that every event I go to, it's everyone around me is so committed, is so passionate. The tourists are gone. We're here because we really believe in this, because we really want to persist. And that is how big things happen. And when you can persist through a crisis, that's when the big opportunities are there. And I genuinely believe that. A second thing is that now with the whole AI and load growth, energy, for those of you working in energy, is actually becoming sexy again. People used to not think about energy because it was obvious. Now energy is on top of the agenda. So that is exciting, because it creates a lot of generalist VCs are starting to think about energy more. People on the street talk about energy more, and that means that will come for opportunities for the energy and for the clean energy world. And then the last thing I'd say is taking a step back once in a while, and to my earlier point, that there's so many highs and lows. Whenever there's a small high, actually celebrating every tiny victory, because it matters. And it's a lot of the kind of companies in our industry, it's very long journeys. It's like marathons. So whenever you can celebrate a victory and celebrate yourself for what you've done. I have this every Friday, I do a little bit of a gratitude, what are the things that I'm proud of this week? And that helps a lot. And that actually helps me push through the hardest times. There's so many things we can and should be proud of.
Thank you so much, Karen. This was incredible. We learned so much, and most of all, your incredible energy. It's super inspiring. You're focused, and you show us that you can stay resilient to the cause you're passionate. So thank you so much for making time. There was one question about when we're going to let the pitch competition applicants know. They'll be soon. Early next week is when you get to know. And so thank you, guys. Please come to the pitch competition and support your fellow founders. And I look forward to seeing you at other events. Thanks for coming. And thank you, Karen.
Keep up the great work, everyone. Happy Friday.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.